In this lesson, we'll cover color schemes. So in previous lessons, we already defined our spaces and we already defined our zones. So in the model on my screen, you can see each space has a space name, space number, and an area. You also can see the outline of the zones. Those zones contain multiple spaces. Maybe we want to add a color scheme for our spaces, or maybe we want to add a color scheme for our zones, or we could do both. So the first thing you would do is create a new view. In that view, give it a new name for, let's say, color for the actual floor plan, and then we would apply the color schemes. So first of all, let's look at the color schemes. So to do that, for specific color schemes for zones and spaces, let's go to the Analyze tab, then to the Spaces and Zones panel, click the Spaces and Zones dropdown, and click Color Schemes. Now what displays are the color schemes currently defined within Revit. Right now I'm looking at the Spaces category on the left, and there's a default scheme called Schema 1. On the right are all of my spaces with the current color assigned to each space. Now you could change the color, the RGB number, the Pantone number, or select and choose a variety of different colors on your own. You can also duplicate the scheme to create new schemes. And I could use the icons in the lower left to duplicate the current schema and then change the new one, or I could rename the current schema, or you can't delete this one, but you could delete other schemas as well if you created new ones. Also, if you wanted to look at different types of schemes based on different types of categories, you can see that by clicking the drop-down under Category. Currently it reads Spaces, but I could change that, for example, to HVAC zones. When I do that, again, I have one schema, but now I see my 4 zones, and each zone has a color scheme to it. In other lessons, when we get into creating different types of systems, ducts, plumbing, we can actually create color schemes for those areas as well too. Go ahead and click OK. Now that we looked at how we can define our color schemes and where we define our color schemes, the next step is to apply a color scheme to this view. So without anything being selected, I'm currently looking at the floor plan properties. Hence it says floor plan on the left in the property box. If I scroll my mouse down in the property box until I get to the entry color scheme, once you are at the entry color scheme, click None on the right. This will then display a very similar box to what we just looked at, but here you actually pick the scheme that you want to use for this floor plan. So I'm going to set the category to spaces, and then I'm going to select Schema 1. Again, this is what we saw a little earlier, and this is the current scheme that I'm going to use. All of these are visible, and these are the colors that are currently set, and they're solids. Go ahead and click OK. What happens now is this floor plan is color-coded based upon that scheme. Now that scheme was based upon spaces. But let's say you wanted to change that, and I want the scheme to be based upon zones. Well, once again, make sure nothing is highlighted or clicked upon. So the floor plan is in the Properties box. Scroll down to Color Scheme, click on Schema 1 on the button on the right, and again, we're back to that same window. This time, change the category from Spaces to HVAC Zones, and then select Schema 1. Your 4 zones are listed with the associated colors and a solid fill pattern. Click OK. Now your model changes to a color scheme based on zones. So as a review in this lesson, what we looked at is how to create or find current color schemes within Revit. We looked at how the color schemes are definable by spaces, by zones, by rooms, or other mechanical equipment. We looked at how we could change the color of the current schema. We looked at how we can add new schemas or rename schemas. And then we went to the actual plan view and looked at how we can change the color scheme for the plan, where we first created a color scheme and assigned the scheme to spaces, and then lastly we changed that scheme to reflect a schema for zones.